start this meeting. So I'll count myself down. 3, 2, 1. Hello, this is the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust meeting on Thursday, January 13, 2022. And it is 1:33 p.m. It's first order of business. We'll have a call to order with a roll call of members. Linda Escobedo.
Here.
Mike Lawson.
Here.
Rich Feely.
Here.
And Keith Bergman here. All right, so all four are here. And we also have with us on the call today, Liz Russ from the Regional Housing Services Office, and Linda Miller from the Planning Board as our liaison with our group. And we have Carolyn Reed, who was also on the call. So welcome all. And we also have Lee Smith with us from the Concord Housing Development Corporation. So welcome, Lee. First item on business is approval of our minutes of January 6, 2022. Those went out, I think, over the weekend. And and I took them out of order. I did the most recent ones that were just fresh in my mind. I still owe you a couple of sets of minutes from last month, but I was able to get those out anyway. So is there a motion to approve those January 6th minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mike, seconded by Rich. Is there discussion? All
I thought they were thorough and well done. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, there was and I usually don't write them that long, but I thought there was a lot of it actually helped me to debrief on what happened at the meeting, to actually have to explain it to a third person by producing minutes. So so great. So on the motion to approve, let's take a roll call vote. Linda?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
And Keith, aye. So those pass unanimously. Very good. Thank you. Next up on our agenda, and the reason we call this meeting on just a week after our last one is the Assabet River Bluff Memorandum of Understanding for the Upland Road, what previously we're calling the Upland Road Old Marlborough Road land acquisition. And there are a number, and we have with us here Lee Smith and Liz Russ to talk to us about that. We circulated some drafts. In fact, Lee has forwarded to us, and it just went out maybe about half an hour ago. I'm not sure everyone saw it in your emails, but there's the most recent draft of the MOU. There are authorizing votes I know that have been taken thus far by Rich's group. The Concord Housing Foundation took an authorizing vote at its meeting yesterday, as did Lee's group, the CHDC, at its meeting last night. And our goal is to be able to take an authorizing vote of the trust today. And I will say that the form, Lee can tell us if it's in final form or not. I saw that the motion that CHDC passed last night authorized its chair to sign it, including minor revisions. Any major substantive things would have to come back. But so Lee, why don't you tell us where things stand right now, and welcome back.
Thank you. So I got an email late yesterday, about 10 minutes before our meeting, from a representative from the Conservation Land Trust asking that that trust be a party to the purchase and sale agreement as a co-buyer. I think the concern is, number one, to maybe try to provide some comfort to donors that they will in fact be, if not the direct grantor, at least a party to the P&S facilitating the conveyance of the parcel B for open space purposes. And then secondarily, they'd have contractual rights if they needed to pursue the return of their portion of the deposit. So I'm generally fine with the idea. I took the version that you got within the last hour or so has not been distributed beyond your group, other than to town council, who I asked to review it. And it's just a first pass at some draft language that would add CLCT as a buyer in addition to CHDC on the P&S. So that's the fundamental change. The other stuff is just some kind of minor additions that various folks have requested that I don't see as controversial.
Okay. I see a
Maybe
question.
just another element to the CLCT piece is that they've got an affiliate nonprofit corporation. It's called the Concord Open Land Foundation Incorporated, and I guess they use that entity to hold title to properties or maybe interim transactions. I don't really know all the specifics, but they had suggested that they may in fact be the entity that would be the party to the agreement. But as I understand it, they're a direct affiliate of the Conservation Trust.
Okay. Thanks, Lee. Mike?
I just had a question for Lee. What could be a possible objection to that ownership?
I don't have one. I didn't know if anybody else who's participating had one. It could potentially complicate or potentially help with the subsequent transfers of the open space parcel. We're still working out, really, as a result of pursuing grant applications, what the requirements of those may be. One question is, does the town of Concord itself need to be the owner of the fee interest in the open space parcel? And we're still working through that.
And if the land trust was a co-owner, then who would hold the conservation restriction?
Well, the concept right now is that let's just say hypothetically the town ended up owning the open space parcel, then presumably the CLCT would be the holder of the conservation restriction, or some variation of all the various entities that are involved.
But if they're an owner, can they also hold they can't hold a restriction?
Correct. But if COLF is the holder, I think probably
Oh, then the
CLCT,
land, I see.
because they're separate legal entities. But
Right. Okay, thank you.
again, I think what will be determinative is what the grant requires. And then just as a heads up, if it has to be the town that holds it, then we need to add that to the warrant, seeking authority to acquire it.
Yeah, I think, and it appears to be from what Delia was telling a working group recently, that there's an article that's being drafted. It'll be, as we've discussed for the CPC, they're expecting a standalone article where their funding will be. But if that article needs to also authorize the town to acquire the property, then that language would be there. And that would be, and that's for parcel B, right? The parcel A, the only part of parcel A that's needed is the funding from the Community Preservation Committee, that the CHD for the 300,000, that requires a town meeting vote. And that, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't, the fact that that money is going to be used by the CHDC doesn't trigger any requirement for a town meeting vote. You have authority to acquire property, and we're just giving, town meeting would just be giving you the funding to do so.
Correct.
I had a question about the, and I appreciate very much, I sat in on virtually on CHDC's meeting last night where they were talking about I think you authorized soils testing or some kind of planning work or some kind of work on the site so that there might be more information available about that could help figure out exactly where should the property line be between parcels A and B to ensure that parcel A is in fact, that we can fit all that we need to fit, including subsurface disposal if there's no sewer hookup. Any idea when resolution would come to those issues? They won't come by the time we're approving the MOU, but they will come at some later date, hopefully before the close of the warrant.
Right, so it's two pieces as of today. One is first having the survey done, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that has been ordered, or if it, yeah, within the last day or two. And then as additional due diligence, I think it makes sense once we've got the survey, which I think we expect to have before the end of the month, to then, weather dependent, try to do some soils analysis or whatever it may be to determine whether parcel A in its entirety could support a subsurface septic system. And then, I think we're probably on to maybe some further definition of concept plans on the site, siting of different buildings, massing, that type of thing. And I assume that would be done through the planning department, consultation with consultants that they would hire, but we haven't quite gotten there yet.
Or the CHDC.
Yeah, we could certainly procure it, but planning department knows a lot more about that stuff than we do, and has worked to create the current concept plan that we have right now.
I think also in February is a new set of appraisals in support of the grant application. So it's the survey and the appraisals are the topmost items that are going on right now.
Linda?
So I heard most of that conversation as well. And Lee, if you could just, or Liz, whether or not some of this, obviously it's not captured in this draft of the MOU. And so what is the thinking about that right now?
Which topic?
Regarding the
Septic?
septic mostly, yeah. And also that in fact there is placement for the 5 units.
Sure. So we decided that in the interest of time that this initial version of the MOU should really just focus on being sufficient to get everybody comfortable to sign a purchase and sale agreement and remit the deposit. And then as these other issues evolve and we reach consensus on something that needs agreement amongst all the parties, we would just do amendments to the current MOU.
In anticipation that would be prior to town meeting?
Yeah, I think we probably need to have just about everything buttoned up except maybe costs of construction or that type of thing for the housing before town meeting, just to have a picture as is practical.
So if there is a need for additional MOU amendments, likely to be after the warrant closes, but before town meeting.
Remind me when the warrant closes?
It's February 2nd.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if there was another amendment by then, but well, are you heading somewhere with your questions?
Good question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess if it's possible, it may be beyond possibility at this point. If it's possible to have that buttoned up before the warrant closes, I think that's helpful. But if not, that's where we are.
The septic piece.
Yeah, especially.
Yeah, it's the difference between having an article that is just written generally versus a description of the precise description of the properties that we can, go to the bank with without certainly.
You can wait till the motion is crafted for that further definition if it's not ready.
Right.
I don't think it will be.
Right, that's all we can do.
Even if there is something that comes up, it can also just be amended at town meeting.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, as we know from the beginning, this project has evolved and continues to further refine as things progress, and that will continue for some time.
Right. Rich, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and maybe Lee can clarify this. The thing that confused me was the correspondence about, well, we want to, if the deal fails, we want our money back, even if you haven't collected from the escrow holder. And that, I mean, I don't think we should be using housing money to pay back the conservation folks any more than conservation folks should be using their money to pay us back. Is that now moot, or did I read that whole conversation wrong?
That was the initial email I got from CLCT, and I didn't copy everybody, but I pushed back on that concept. I mean, CHDC doesn't have money to do that in any event, and we can't guarantee,
we shouldn't be using trust money for it either.
Yeah. So that's really the next iteration of that was the proposal that they become a party to the PNS, in which case they'd have legal rights to pursue a deposit in the event of a dispute.
Okay, but we're not.
Which I think is a good resolution.
Yeah, right. But we're not guaranteeing to pay them back, even if we have.
No.
That's fine. I mean, the only real issue I think I see here is if we find that there's insufficient area to perk on the, housing parcel, and we have to trade, 10,000 square feet with a conservation parcel in order to have a septic field. Hopefully that won't happen, but I mean, it seems to me that's exactly the kind of thing that can only be negotiated later. So that's fine.
And one of the questions that came up, how close is the sewer line to this property? It ends at Cottage. I think I heard now, is it on Old Marlborough at Cottage or it's at Cottage? It's not on Old Marlborough. Is that, anyone know where it is?
Well, at the corner of Cottage and Old Marlborough, but on the other side of the street from the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail.
Okay, so it's basically it's two, it's one lot away, right? So sounds like.
It's in the vicinity, but it's not right there. And from the beginning, we were encouraged to not count on sewer being available for this. But
I wonder if that
that can
changes.
be.
Yeah, I wonder if that changes if ARPA funding or something becomes a piece of it, and not to. I mean, I don't know how much encouragement that we might take out of the fact that that there are ARPA funds that the town can spend. I don't know how for all of the purposes that Concord might want to use those funds. I'm not sure how competitive our project would be, or if that's a funding source for our, instead of free cash for the trust's annual $500,000 appropriation. I'm not sure. At the end of the day, money is money, but and there's the opportunity, or will be, for competitive applications of state ARPA funds as well, I think.
So that would be part of the construction and the actual housing development portion of the project, I think.
Yeah, it would be, except that it's the difference between knowing whether you got a sewer hookup or if you're gonna have to solve your on-site, your disposal on
Mhm.
site. And I suppose if we, through our due diligence, find, we made our best try and we just can't figure out how to do it on a septic system, then maybe, I don't know, before we throw in the towel, now we're talking, in future years, that maybe sewer extension is something that could be considered, but we'll just, the plan A for parcel A really ought to be to see how we can fit an on-site system that serves or the capacity to be able to serve all 5 of these units. So, and I'm very pleased with the progress that's been made on this MOU. I think that I think we did find that we're getting bogged down in a lot of the bigger issues that require more time and information to resolve, and that the immediate goal to be met is to preserve the ability for the town for the property rather to be acquired by making the deposit. And so I think it was, I'm glad if the parties can sign on to language that brings a comfort level for, I'm comfortable with this document for the $50,000 that we put up. And I hope that if the open space folks can feel the same way about their 90,000, then we've made necessary progress this week. So that's great. Any other questions about any of this? Yeah, Lee.
I think maybe I'll defer to the chair if he disagrees, but is it worth a conversation about your prior vote, which included, I can't remember, what did it say, not less than 5 units versus 5 units? Because as the discussion has evolved amongst the working group and the parties in the MOU, it is 5 units explicitly, no more, no less.
Right. Yeah. And for full disclosure, well, thanks for mentioning that. For full disclosure, lest any of our members, look, have the question later, gee, what happened to our initial vote of authorizing no fewer than 5 units when we approved the 600,000? If signing this document essentially says that we're okay with 5 units. And I guess my approach is, as the funding agency, we're saying to CHDC, you can take our money and you got to produce no fewer than 5 units, to which CHDC is saying, okay, as part of the big deal, we're doing 5. So just so long as everyone is aware of that, I think we could take a vote. But and hello, Carrie LaFleur, who's joined us. So thanks for being here. We're just getting to the point of taking a motion on, or taking a vote on approval of a revised draft MOU for Assabet River Bluff. And I guess since Carrie's on the call now, I ask maybe for clarification about when we were discussing various funding mechanisms to pull together the total of 2.9 million for the project. I think we're trying very hard to not use any funds that that might not need to come from the town, but we, hats off to the town staff for identifying 2 grant funding sources to go after. Hopefully, for, I don't know, is somewhere between $500,000 or $750,000. But at a previous meeting, Carrie, I think there'd been talk of some CIP funds as a last resort, which might be part of the capital plan article, or part of a separate article for this for this acquisition, and didn't know if there's any more information that we should be aware of regarding that. Those
Sure, so not necessarily any more information, but we are prepared to include $500,000 in the FY23 capital improvement plan for this project if that funding is needed because the grant applications are not successful. And as I mentioned the last time, this is a request that came in long after we closed our application period, but understanding the importance of this acquisition, we think that we could fit it in if we had to make sure that this happened.
Thanks for that clarification, Carrie. And what it may end up being, I think, and one of the things that we're looking at with the time, what's the timing that the town would actually, even if the town gets a grant, what's the timing for having the cash in hand or being able to, well, we have to spend it up front. So it could be, and these are reimbursement grants, we get them. So the $500,000 could be the money we pay up front and then gets reimbursed later. That's one possible, I think, scenario for that. All right. So thank you, Carrie, for the town's participation on that. Further questions about this? I think what I'd like to get is a motion to authorize the chair to execute the Assabet River Bluff MOU on behalf of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, subject to any minor revisions that may be presented.
If you captured that language, also move.
Okay, second.
Motion by Mike, second by Rich. Is there discussion? Okay, well, let's, I see a hand up. Okay, Liz.
So when we met earlier in the working group, you voiced a concern that the trust had voted for, what was the language about in terms of the number of units? At least, were you at least or something? I'm sorry. I'm forgetting.
No, I think
And
we're.
that you were concerned
just
about the discrepancy in the language and whether you would revote that also today?
We just talked through that. I think that I don't know. Well, number one, we took our vote on the funding, and and as I just said, and I can repeat it, that we were offering that CHDC as applicant could use the funds for no fewer than 5 units, and that by our assigning this MOU, we are recognizing that CHDC is essentially saying, no, thanks, we will do 5 units. We will do precisely 5 units. So that's the understanding. And I got, I think, nodding heads in all cases. So our board members and our trust members in approving this MOU today would understand that that's the consequence of the vote.
Thank you for clarifying.
Is there further discussion? All right, so on the motion to authorize the chair to execute the MOU with minor non-substantive revisions, I'll do a roll call. Linda?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Rich?
Aye.
And Keith, aye. All right. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Mr. Chair, just a point of clarification. I might have needed to bring this up
Doesn't want to take
in the
yes.
discussion, but
Go ahead.
sorry.
You don't want to take yes for the answer.
Does that vote, I guess, refer to the version I sent you earlier today that refers to land Conservation Trust as a potential party to the PNS? I know we discussed it and it seemed to be positive, but
Yeah, well, I'd say
because I would call that a substantive change, but
well, except
been-
that we knew about it when we voted it.
just checking. Thank you.
Right.
So, you know, to execute the MOU dated January 13th, 22.
Yeah, we can certainly have the good point to the draft with today's date, which contains the language that Lee just sent us. So the motion will so reflect. Everyone okay with that? All right, great. And I guess the only other question is that when do you need you've already got an authorizing vote for the deposit. So, and just to remind us and Carrie, when you need the check.
So we still need to develop and agree upon the purchase and sale agreement. Just given the pace that this has taken and the number of parties involved, I'm going to say probably not less than a week, realistically, maybe 2 weeks from today. Is
Okay.
when we would need the deposit. I will push it along as fast as I can, but there's a lot of
Very
folks
good.
that need to weigh in.
Okay, thanks for giving us a heads up on that.
You're welcome.
Okay, any,
Should we, Carrie had said last time it would take a week or so to get the check generated under the normal administrative. Should we authorize her to cut that check?
do you need that vote, Carrie, do you think, or is there a prior vote approving it?
I don't think it's required. I think it's fine with the vote that you took.
Okay,
And Lee, I'll reach out to you and get the specifics on the check so I can get that in the works. It would be easiest if we could just do that now and it's on our regular accounts payable warrant.
Okay, and the town can just hold that until the PNS is ready to be signed.
Yeah.
I think that'll work well.
Very good. Okay, thanks all for the great work that's been done on this project.
Thank you all as well.
We'll stay
Appreciate it.
in touch. All right, next item is developing proposed guidelines for the trust for select board approval. And want to thank Rich Feely for preparing first volunteering and then preparing a first draft document for our discussion and review. And I had some comments and I decided not to email them out or circulate them, and I'll just but I appreciate very much the work that was done, and ready to discuss. Oh, Lee.
Sorry to interrupt. I know CHDC was asked to provide comments, and I think you've got those and that were kind of a part of this, but I'm having a crazy day at my real
Sure.
job. So I'll touch base with Liz.
Thanks, Lee.
Okay.
And I
Thanks
did-
very much.
We did get those and I did forward them on to the group. So
Okay.
thanks so much.
Great. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
So Rich, do you want to perhaps walk us through?
Well,
the
let
draft?
me give you the thinking behind it. And,
Yeah.
I don't, these are not something that I got set in stone on top of Punkatassett Hill. I mean, these are, things that I think we need to cover, things like the maximum number and stuff like that. I think per unit, I think obviously need a lot of discussion. One question I had is simply what we can do, because I couldn't remember whether the trust itself can be involved with units that are above 80 or 100 or 120% of AMI. I mean, I think there is a need for trying to save some of the houses that, would otherwise be unobtainable for somebody who's a teacher or a nurse, somebody like that. But I didn't know whether that would be something the trust could do, or whether we'll need another mechanism for that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Rich, and I was glad that you saw that you put those in there, because it caused me to reach out to the Mass Housing Partnership, Shelley Goring, who had done some who does support work for municipal affordable housing trusts in the Commonwealth, had sent us some guidebook information which offered an answer that well, it offered the fact that there was no answer to what low and moderate income means, because there's no definition in either in the Affordable Housing Trust statute. So this morning I emailed Shelley, and she just emailed back that my question was whether municipal affordable housing trust funds could ever be used for 120% of AMI, which I understand we think of, and Liz had used the term Concord affordable. So it's a thing. It's some that I guess people know about. But from reviewing the information that was online from MHP, it looked to me like 100% of AMI might be the upper limit, and I asked her to confirm. What she wrote is that that they do urge communities to consider existing programs to see what the definitions of those programs are. The Massachusetts Affordable Housing Trust, that's administered by Mass Housing, does define low and moderate income up to 110%. And that given that 120% is just above that, it may be reasonable for Concord to define middle income that way. That's what she writes, middle income. Of course, you need to be careful to use only funds that do not restrict the allocation to 80% or 100% of AMI. And she suggests that we connect with town council and make sure that this conversation includes key leadership positions in Concord, which by having the interim town manager and a select board member and regional housing services, we do. So we're not having the discussion in a vacuum. And part of that is that to the extent that, let's say, for example, if any of our trust funding ever came from an appropriation from the Community Preservation Act, if funds were ever given to us and a town meeting vote to transfer CPA community housing funds to the trust, those dollars would have to comply with the standards for community preservation, which is you can only do up to 100% of AMI. If there's other funds coming from other funding sources, I guess we could comply with those. And I see Liz's hand up. Please.
Yeah, so it's really a good question. I think that the Concord zoning defines the Concord affordable, and so that would be, I think, considered a program in this case. And Concord has a number of units up to the 150% AMI as permitted through the Concord PRD zoning. So it's in alignment with that program and those units exist and are restricted in such a way so that they have the affordable housing restrictions, but they go up to 150. There are some that are 140. And so on down the line. So that would be my sense. And I think that you're exactly right. Like the CPA funds are max at 100% AMI. And I think that your trust purpose allows you to go up to the 150% AMI in alignment with the Concord zoning, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think since that's not a funding program, it may, I think and as MHP advises, I think we'd need an opinion from town council in order to do that. I don't know if there's any I don't know if there's any guidance from the Department of Revenue, Carrie, on such things, but again, we don't want to be operating in a vacuum and start spending money on particular income groups that someone later tells us we didn't have the authority to do. I will say this, though, that up until December 6th, the so-called affordable housing funds were just a town meeting appropriation. And so whatever the town in general thought affordable housing meant, I would think you could use it. And however, once the funds were then transferred to the Affordable Housing Trust, I think they then became something else. They became subject to a state law that we just want to be careful about. I don't have any problem with us, and I think it's important for us to identify what levels of AMI we want to support, which ones we want to prioritize, but we just want to make sure that we have the legal authority to do that. I see,
Well, especially because the transfer surcharge and the building permit specifically talked about creating workforce housing as part of the objective of those funding sources, which would be above the 100%. So I think it's an important consideration. So that if that's
that's a great example too, because that would be another mechanism to the extent that there's state legislation that's creating other funding sources. That would be another mechanism for us to point to and see, well, what is that? If we ever do get a real estate transfer fee, or if we get a building permit surcharge, what are the levels that are allowed in those? Rich, your hand is up.
No, I think those two, the home rules, I don't think would restrict us. I mean, I think we're restricted by town policy, but there's no reference in there to 100% or anything like that. Let me check the statewide authorizing legislation and see if that, by referencing other things, may create a ceiling if what we get is the statewide law, which will permit us to do what we passed at town meeting, but that may have a constraint on who you can use it for. But I'll review that legislation and get back to the committee.
Okay, that would be great, and maybe what we would want to do is add a definitions section to our guidelines, which where we're explicitly adopting what's our definition of low and moderate income, as those are the phrases of what our statute says, and to the extent that we can give definitions to those, which then reference what the funding sources are, that would be a helpful guide to knowing what we can spend the funds on.
Okay. I'll try and get that answer distributed to the committee in an email. I mean, otherwise, what I tried to do with that document was just think of the kinds of things we could spend money on, which would include land, construction, buying down additional units in a PUD, or upgrading of existing affordable units. But I thought we didn't want to get into routine maintenance. I mean, it would have to be some major thing like putting in heat pumps or something like that before we would, consider using the trust for that. And then that anything we did had to, be done in such a way that the income restriction, whatever it was, carries forward. But I thought, and then I thought about what are the partner organizations, obviously, potentially the Housing Authority, potentially developers and potentially nonprofits like Habitat. In other words, that's an arrangement that the town has now, and we certainly would want to recognize that as a potential recipient of funds. Again, all with the appropriate income restrictions. I'm happy to hear comments now, or if people want to, if people want to just send me markups, I can try and come up with something approximating a consensus draft.
Liz?
Great. You may consider the category of activity that would be around support. So that would be things like rental assistance programs, first-time homebuyer programs, things that aren't, oriented towards the brick and mortar, if you will. Those are allowable in the CPA, and so that they would be, things that you could carry over. And of course, you could decide whether to or not, but if you're creating high-level goals, most trusts would have that. In fact, in COVID times, a lot of emergency rental assistance programs were developed and administered by housing trusts using CPA funds, for example. So that's an eligible activity that you'd want to include in your portfolio. Whether you choose to fund that and go forward is a different question, but so that just might be another category.
Okay, yeah, my first thought was that, I thought about rental assistance, but I thought, our real job here is to try to either create or preserve units, and that, rental assistance, like Section 8, was not a capital investment function. It makes affordable housing possible, I understand. But my first reaction was, I thought about it, but didn't include it. But obviously, if the committee thinks that's something that should be in there. When you talk about,
you're a funding organization, so to the extent that Concord wants, let's say, I don't know, the CHGC or some group in Concord wanted to have that program and came to you requesting funds for that, you'd like to be able to hear the request and not dismiss it out of hand.
I'll give you an example that was talked about, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 years ago, when the planning board was changing some zoning requirements to allow conversion to two-family houses, and also to create, I forgot what they're called, but accessory units. Is that what they're called? Accessory units? So at the time when that was being talked about, they talked about coupling it with an affordable housing funding source that would allow these separate units to be rent subsidized, and to use affordable housing trust funds to subsidize the rent of these converted units. So I think that's something that, whether it becomes one of our major priorities or not, I would like it to still consider to be looked at.
Okay, we could, at this point, I'm talking only as your scribe, not making a case one way or the other. We can put that in. Liz, when you talk about first-time homeowner programs, are you talking about, essentially a second mortgage that would enable somebody to get an 80% mortgage, the subordinated?
Yeah, sometimes people have down payment assistance. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, we can. That's certainly one way to make things more affordable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that the towns of Boxborough and Littleton have a focus on rental subsidies for their affordable housing trusts, in part because they don't have a lot of money and they can't get in, they weren't really getting into the capital, supporting capital things. So they tried to go as far as they could with what small dollars they have.
Yeah, I guess maybe my focus is on the fact that, the way things are going here, we're not going to have very many buildings that, are potentially affordable where rental subsidies would help, other than the ones we already have, unless we either, get some spaces in new PUDs if there are any, or we can save some buildings. But again, that's me, not your scribe talking, and we can debate that.
Is there input from any, Linda?
You're muted, Linda.
The Concord Housing Development Corporation sent along their response to identifying their priorities among the housing goal compilation. But before we get into that, I want to zero in on the first item under the Envision Concord section that talked about developing realistic, achievable targets for preserving or creating housing of all types beyond the state housing inventory. And I'd just like to ask if anyone in this room, including Liz and others, know where that came from and how that ended up in the Envision Concord, because I know at some prior meetings, there were some questions about where did this come from? Because it's so difficult for us to
Very
project.
difficult.
Yeah,
Yep.
to project these.
I think,
targets.
it's difficult to even create where Concord is right now on various measures, right? Just to do a tracking, but then what should the number be? So I think that I don't know the answer to that, I guess.
I think it came up at the confluence of the long-range planning folks meeting at the same time we were debating funds about Junction Village. And what emerged as one of the arguments is we really didn't know what we were trying to accomplish. I don't mean we, but the town didn't really have any specific goals with respect to what it would look like when we were all done. I think that's why it wound up in the Envision Concord plan. I don't know. I wasn't at many of those meetings, but I think it started with that debate over the Junction Village project.
I raised that now at this point in our discussion today, because I've already heard it brought forward as an argument for not allocating free cash funds for the trust because we don't have specific targets. And, we don't even, and so we're sort of caught here. When you try to explain to people that we don't, as Liz aptly points out, we don't even have clarity right now where we stand vis-a-vis the new census and what DHCD is expecting in terms of the required units. But even if we did have some clarity at this point in time, it is difficult to project targets beyond that, given the lack of stability of our funding sources and or, as well as the opportunistic aspect of a lot of the work that results in creative development of units. So I don't have the solution here, but I'm raising this as a dilemma that we somehow have to acknowledge that this now is in writing as a particular goal that's in Envision Concord, that some people are ready to wrap their hands around. Not always in the favor of affordable housing, but more importantly, how we can project some more certainty or some more clarity towards some realistic goals, even if we know the limitations in setting them.
Yeah, I have a couple of suggestions. One is a practical matter, $500,000. I mean, for $650,000, well, forget that. For $1 million, we're getting the land for 5 units, right? We're getting an existing 2-family and at Assabet River Bluff, and the land on which we can build 3 more affordable units. So that's one measure. So and that's $1 million basically to be able to do 5 units. So as a metric, what is $500,000 going to do? Less than that. And I think we can certainly put a number on what does 500,000, if all we're asking for is 500,000, we can quantify that could, produce, I don't know, what, 2, maybe 2, 3 if we're lucky, but a small enough number so that hopefully it would be seen as not unreasonable for us to seek that funding. I think it would be a different order of magnitude. I can guess it will be a different order of magnitude if in our long-term goals we have millions and millions of dollars that are available from a real estate transfer fee. That would, the metric that we would need to develop for that would be one that should be studied greatly in depth and be a part of, that's why, the updating of the housing production plan and getting everybody together and figuring out what our goals are. It will be very important for us to do it and articulate it. We'll be able to include presumably what does it look like the town's obligations will be with MBTA commuter rail zoning. That's now that will be a requirement for commuter rail communities by 2023, and all sorts of things. Hopefully though, in the short term, to the extent that we need to quantify it, maybe we just say, but maybe our guidelines say, based on our short-term revenue stream of hopefully $500,000 a year, we would anticipate being able to add 2 to 3 units per year.
I think I agree with that, having a number. I think I might like to make it more like 3 to 5, but 5 is obviously aspirational. But it also depends on where it is in the income spectrum. At the higher end, you obviously need less money because the occupants can put in more. So yeah, I think we go with that number. And as a basis, I'm just thinking of that one study that was done by the town, 51 houses that sold for an average of $550. This is going back 2 and 3 years, became $1.4 million houses. So there went 15 houses a year out of the stock that could by any means be afforded by somebody working in Concord, let alone somebody at 80 or 100% of AMI. So I'd support the idea of having a target of, creating or preserving 3 to 5 units per year.
Thanks, Rich. Mike?
I think this is a little complicated. I think we should address this realistic goals head on by simply saying, not simply saying, but saying to have realistic goals requires two things in my mind: a consensus of what's important for the town and then a reliable funding source. You can't have goals unless you know what amount of money is going to be available to you to help you achieve those goals. So I think when we're hearing from the Finance Committee, I suspect, of concern about that, I think it should be turned right back. We would love to have reliable goals. That's why we submitted those 2 home rule petitions, because we estimated an amount of money that would be a regular occurrence for us, and then we could plan what we could try to accomplish. And until we have that source of funding, we're going to need to more or less operate opportunistically. And I understand the arithmetic Keith just put forward, but what if all we did was subsidize rent? What could we add to our arsenal if we worked with owners to subsidize rent on existing properties and bring those rental units into the housing production plan? So I understand, and you know, the arithmetic of dividing 500 by some number to give us a unit is appealing. But I think it overly simplifies the complex problem we face when we don't know what kind of funding we're going to be receiving. And we have so many affordable housing goals. So that probably wasn't very helpful, but nevertheless.
No, I think it certainly speaks to, let's make sure that rental assistance is on our radar screen. And maybe we can come up with some, you know, there are some simple math metrics of what, you know, if you got 500,000, it was all supporting rent. What do we think based on, you know, the gaps to be filled? What do we think that might be? How many households might we be able to support?
That's why I would approach it in the sense of, if our goal was to create new owner-occupied housing, what could we accomplish? If our goal was to have rental properties, what could we accomplish? And I don't want us to exhaust that because it's ridiculous, but we could have 2 or 3 examples of goals we could have and what our current level of funding might be able to provide for us. And as I've said, and as I think I've said before, when we go to the select board, I think we should go with some kind of a statement that says, until we know our source of funding, we are not going to be able to, in depth, really define this activity and our guidelines and processes in the meantime, and then say what we're going to do in the meantime. And then continue to work with the state to hopefully get some closure on one or both of these home rule petitions. But I think even at an annual funding of $500,000, to try to incorporate all of these goals here is just is whistling in the wind. I mean, it's not going to get us anything. So I would really like to just see us go in with it. Look, $500,000 is what we plan to do until we have resolution of these home rule petitions. If that's the amount of funding that we're going to do, there's a variety of things we can do. Here are some options that we could tell you about. But that's as far as we're going to go. That's my.
Thanks, Mike.
I think that, excuse me.
Yeah, I was going to say, and thanks to Linda for raising this issue, because we know it's been raised, and it's important that we address it. I think it's important that that we figure out what is our answer to the question of our what are our metrics. Linda?
Yeah, I like the approach that Mike is giving narrative to, and I think it also makes it manageable for people to digest, given the current scenario in terms of funding. And I think realistically, you know, even saying to our, if we were to even say, we think 500,000, if we were looking at new capital construction would result in 1 unit, we know for a fact that that doesn't even hold, given the current scenario and what we've just experienced with the downturn by the select board of the total cost for the ComAv property for CHA. So, you know, I'm very cautious about raising expectations that just aren't even, we're not capable of quantifying, and nobody exactly quantifying at this point, which then leads to disillusionment by the people who are already objecting.
That's exactly right. And then when you don't meet those goals, because you never could, it becomes impossible for you to get continuing kind of funding. It's a terrible loop.
Yeah, and maybe what part of what we do is explain what we've done. And for example, on for our investment of 650,000 for the Assabet River Bluff, that's just part of a bigger picture, right? We're part of $1 million land acquisition in an unspecified, yet to be determined development costs, which may be triggering, I don't know if something like that is eligible for competitive state ARPA funding, or if there might be other state grant programs for housing that we could go after. There are a lot of them out there. Anyway, Carrie, you have your hand up.
So you probably have talked about this before, but do we have any sense of how much money would you have to dedicate or for rental assistance? Like how much would that cost?
I don't know if Liz has any examples from her other client communities that are doing rental.
There are many different kinds of rental assistance programs. So some are deep subsidies like Section 8, but municipalities rarely provide that kind of funding because it's so long-term. If you provide, anything substantial to a tenant, you really need to be doing that over a 5-year period of time. You can't just do 1 year and then pull the rug out. So municipalities usually work in a more of a, what I might call a rent booster kind of program, maybe $500 to $1,000 to $1,500 per month for qualifying tenants based on the number of bedrooms in the unit. And depending on what kind of income they are and cost burden are they. We've run any number of these kinds of programs for emergency rental assistance, where you have like a 4 to 6 month window that can be renewed, or now people are looking at more like a year-long contract. But let's say for a tenant, maybe it's going to be $1,000 per month for a 1-bedroom, maybe $1,200 for a 2-bedroom over a year, something like that. That might be, there are many different ways of crafting such a program, but that could be some kind of benchmark.
So I was just guessing that it was $2,000. So if it's $2,000 a month, which I guess seems too high, but for every $100,000, you could subsidize 4 units. And I guess in this environment where the funding might be a little tighter this year, that maybe for a smaller amount, you could make a big impact with rental units.
Right. This has come up in the past, especially with the CARES money. And Concord chose not to pursue this kind of program, even when there was available funding for it. And so I think that you'd want to talk to Bonnie Wilbur, in terms of what is the need and how are rent difficulties being supported and serviced.
The other complication with that is that, as Liz said, it's really not. If you had $100,000, you could do 4 units or 5 units, whatever the arithmetic is. But you have to have that same amount of money for a few years, so you have, unless funding is continued, it gets to be tricky. The other thing is looking at turnover. What kind of person are you trying to help subsidize? Are permanent residents, people who are working in town. If you're talking about people who are working in town, they tend to turn over a little more quickly than more permanent residents. So again, it gets to be fairly complicated in trying to figure it out, even on something as arithmetically straightforward as Carrie's talking about.
Yeah, I think the other thing we have to recognize is that some of the programs we can do would have a return to us. In other words, that depending on how we do it, either the homeowner or the developer will certainly be incurring some of the costs. So, it's not like we have to buy the land and build the entire house and not get anything back for it. But that, it still doesn't solve the question of what's the number we're starting with here, which is small and uncertain at the moment prior to any transfer fee. What I hear is we really need a preamble that says we need to do more, but we can't yet. Our goal is to, support families up to X% of income. And the following methods can be used. We've expanded the list, and that what will be done in any given year will be a function of the amount available, the amount committed to prior projects. In other words, what we'll need to finish Upland Road, for instance. With the goal of making as many units as possible affordable or accessible, using that as a operative term for somewhat higher AMI. And I'd be happy to have a go at that if people would like to send me markups as well. That would be helpful.
I think, I think you've captured what would be helpful in a preamble. And I think the additional concept I would add there is, and our continuing effort to leverage other funds to maximize the impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that should be a goal of the trust, is to leverage everything from developer money to grants to whatever. Yes.
Very good. Other comments that we want to make today? This has been a great conversation. I'm glad that we diving into the weeds a bit here. Linda?
Just one other thought that came to mind since we're on this. I think a couple of you have already suggested, to be able to say an example that we've been able to execute in FY22 is the Assabet River Bluff project. You talk about how what the goal was, which was which is the number 3rd goal under Envision, bring private and public groups representing open space, land conservation, resilience, and housing together to identify solutions for meeting housing needs. That's a line where you identify the actual goal and then talk about how the following parties came together to arrive at the purchase for 2.8 million of this property, with the potential of 5 units of housing and 5 point whatever acres of open space. It's succinct, it's clear, it follows. It shows, that we've linked all these pieces together, and this is what the trust contribution of $650,000 went towards of the total two. And there's, there's not, it's manageable. People can wrap their hands around all that. May not agree or not agree, but at least it's manageable. So I'm seeing something that would be that, better worded, obviously, but that clean in presentation and almost that succinct.
Yeah, I like that idea, that our guidelines could simply include a brief description of projects that we've funded as examples of projects that we would like to fund again, as one measure of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I mean, I think other things may come up. It wouldn't surprise me totally if our friend who's trying to develop 1440 Main Street finally throws in the towel, and you get somebody who comes in who wants to do a more modest PUD, and then, there would be an opportunity to buy down some units in there and, increase the number of units there. So, I mean, I wouldn't use that example in this document, but I certainly would talk about it informally.
Very good. Any further comments today? Rich, do you think you have enough to go on a second? Well, shall we? What would help you come up with the next iteration, to the extent that we're now volunteering you to?
Markups and marginal notes to be sure that I didn't forget anything
Okay.
people said here. I'm happy to, then try and create a second draft.
Right. I'll try to put a set of minutes out too in the next couple of days to just as a refresher of the things we're talking about here. Liz?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing as you're talking about, what to do with your money is the concept of feasibility money or first money in. The select board was open to that, and certainly with the Commonwealth Avenue project, the select board, authorized up to $50,000 for them to do, the initial feasibility, as well as getting architecture drawings and all like that. And it's important to have a source. Well, it's, very useful for projects to have a source of funds to be able to do that pre-work. You can see the kind of work that's going on now with the Assabet River Bluff, with the, appraisals and survey and all of that. And those monies are kind of scarcer.
Well, yeah, you don't have to wait for the next budget year to come up with them. I mean, I think that.
Right.
that
So
kind
that's
of
just something before there can
preliminary
be a
work.
commitment. Before there's a commitment on the units and what can be done. So, but just to, as you talk more about your funding.
Another example I can think of from my wish list is some money to the school board to look at consolidating administration and freeing up land at either Peabody and or Ripley that we could use for housing. If they don't have it in their budget, that would be a good use of housing money.
Yeah, exactly, that kind of thing, yeah. So just something to put on the list to talk about further.
And maybe just a reference to what sort of our mantra has been, that because we don't need to wait for town meeting funding to approve a project, that we can, we have the flexibility to take advantage of as timely opportunities come up, that we take, and I think that's a key determinant sometimes of things that we spend money on. And even in the we were even able to be of service to the Assabet River Bluff project by having the cash to put down on a deposit, even though they have to go to town meeting months from now to get the rest of the money. So that, so I'm glad that we were here to do that, and we could do that again if need be. Okay. All right, thanks. I do want to thank everyone again for the discussion on that point. Thank Rich for his leading us in our discussion on it. I do want to talk about 2022 annual town meeting funding. which is the next item, and exploring additional alternative funding sources. And the story thus far is that there's an article on the warrant for funding the trust. And the dollar amount and the funding source have not been determined. I know the select board has a focused meeting that's scheduled for January 31st on ARPA funding, and didn't know if our group might be able to benefit from any of the ARPA funds that's available to the town or not. Or if we should ask, or well, we can show up at the meeting, but I don't know if there's a particular procedure that the town is following to spend the money. It does not require a town meeting vote, right?
I think we're in a learning mode is my, Carrie's here, so she could speak to
Yeah.
this. I think for the select board meeting on the 31st, we're in a learning mode and trying to just see where we are with that and what the town is thinking in terms of priorities and go from there. Carrie, you may have more to add to that than.
So Terry is just putting together the agenda now, and I just went back and looked, and there's definitely an opportunity for public comment. And I think it would be particularly helpful if this group had a short statement to make indicating your interest in some of those funds.
Okay. I think that would be a timely thing for us to do. I sat on a couple of MAPC related meetings this week. There was a Magic subregion meeting on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday I was chairing MAPC's legislative committee and asked about ARPA funding at both, because I'm in I haven't been paying attention to it. The rules changed, I guess, in the last month or so and that the opportunity for more communities in Massachusetts to use their ARPA funds for housing happen. That's a fairly recent development to my understanding. But I was able to get the answer that it seems like it doesn't, the use of whatever your entitlement funds are, or whatever you're getting, does not require a town meeting vote. But it would be up to whatever the internal procedure is in a town or under a town charter. If there's some dollar amount threshold that kicks it to one place or another. But in any event, I'm very glad that the select board is taking up this issue, and prompted by the cue from Carrie. Would anyone like to make a motion that we send a letter to the select board requesting that they consider our annual funding, all or a portion of our annual funding from ARPA funds, if those should become available? Rich, I can't hear what Rich is saying.
You're muted, Rich.
Yep, sorry. So moved. I just wouldn't want it necessarily to preclude the town putting its own money in. But I certainly think I would like to see the town look at using ARPA money for housing. Absolutely. So moved that the town be asked to fund an appropriation for next year to the trust through ARPA and or town sources as conditions permit.
Yeah, I'd suggest just that we previously had a motion. We'd had a request which the selectmen granted to put an article in the warrant. So we've got an article in the warrant. That'll be there as an option. And I guess what I'm saying, for the purposes of ARPA funding, what we might want to do is specifically ask the select board to consider the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust for any ARPA funding that may help, us reach our funding goal.
Yeah, I think you don't want to tie these two together. And I would leave out the goals. I would just, my proposed motion would be that we authorize the chair to write to the select board to ask them to consider using ARPA funding to support affordable housing goals in Concord.
Second,
I like the motion by Mike and second by Rich. Thank you. That's, is there further discussion on that? All right, so let's, on that motion, let's take a roll call. Linda,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
Rich,
aye.
and Keith, aye. Passes 4-0. Very good. And I just want to say, I have the system worked out with Chris Carmody that even though it takes a long time for our videos to get posted on YouTube, he gets as soon as our meeting is over, he gets a link to the cloud, and he'll send me the link so that I can check immediately what the language of our motions are. So I'm going to do that, make sure I get it right. And I thank Chris for his help. Anything else that we need to talk about under the exploring additional alternative funding? I guess I just, I don't, and maybe it's a sore subject, has Concord ever done borrowing for housing? Authorized borrowing, or have you authorized borrowing for community preservation projects?
Not that I can recall.
With the funding source of CBA, yeah, because in 2003, when I got Provincetown to adopt the CPA, we immediately borrowed money that we had $3 million worth of things that we had to get done right away, and were the reasons why we adopted the Community Preservation Act. And so we authorized, $3 million worth of borrowing for housing projects. And indeed, I know Littleton is doing that too, where annually they're doing, the debt service on prior open space purchases or something is the first thing that you pay with funding. And I didn't know if that was a potential funding source, not so much for the trust, but just for what we do, whether it's housing or open space, because then the revenue source is the CPA, would be the CPA and not the property tax. So it's a separate, so it would be a separate revenue. It would not impact the levy limit. Linda?
Keith, I can just comment from my experience with the CBC over a number of years that this topic has the various committees periodically are informed of this option through CPC, but it's never gone further than that because most of the projects they've been able to phase over a couple years with they have funded projects with the idea that they're likely to be a 2 or 3 year phase project that'll be coming back to CPC, and they've handled it that way. But periodically they have visited this topic just to keep themselves informed of the option.
Okay, thanks. And it's certainly not for us to decide, but we're talking about additional revenue sources, and it might be something to look at, and not to tell too many tales out of school, but while we had a majority support for adoption of the overwhelming support for adoption of the CPA in Provincetown. We also understood that there might be a move to get us to unaccept the, have another, referendum vote to undo it. And we were challenged on that, and by which time we had borrowed money. And the answer that we gave is, well, if you've got outstanding borrowing, you cannot unaccept the Community Preservation Act. So it was at least that community uses it as a defensive measure to keep the revenue stream coming. But, all right. Anything else about additional funding sources? Yes, Linda.
I'm sorry to keep one thing I did check as recently as yesterday was to see what the current status is of the building permit home rule and the transfer fee home rule. And, as you recall, Senator Barrett and Representative Corvea came to the select board a couple months ago, and we were asked specifically about what their suggestions were for each of these home rule petitions that are still pending. I guess what I would say at this point, particularly for, and Rich will want to comment further perhaps on the transfer fee, particularly the statewide transfer fee item that's before the legislature. But with the building permit Senate bill, a letter from us asking them to get it out of the orders of the day for next section before February 2nd would be timely. And if it was, given the housing shortage and the emphasis on affordable housing and the fact that this has been consistently supported by various groups, we're asking our legislators to see what they can do to get this moving. But and we were led to believe that the Senate bill, Senate docket 2597, for the building permit home rule petition was one that was more likely at this point. And then Rich can speak to the activity on the statewide transfer fee bill, which probably has more opportunity than the Concord home rule petition.
Well, it's about to get more interesting. I guess I'm not telling stories out of school. The Mass General Brigham will come out in favor of it publicly next week sometime, to be followed by most of the big hospital systems, I think. So it's no longer housing interest versus real estate interest. You've got the biggest employment sector in the state saying we need this. And the push is to obviously get it out by the reporting date of February 2nd. So I think you'll see a lot more in the press over the next couple of weeks. I can't predict whether it'll get out of the Joint Housing Committee or not, but it's going to heat up. And I'm hoping that with a major segment of the economy saying this is a good idea, that it's going to change the debate. But that's where we are at the moment. And the key date is February 2nd, when to be considered in this session, bills are supposed to be reported out of committee.
And thanks, Rich. And I know our trust had sent a letter to the committee in support of the bill, in support of that statewide bill when you had asked us a month or so ago. However, because we're the new kid on the block, I do not think that we've ever taken a position on Concord's two home rule petitions. So maybe it would be appropriate again, where you've got the the February 2nd deadline for either the bill gets reported out favorably by the committee or it's dead. That, as Linda suggests, maybe we want to go on the record and support and have this committee support those 2 home rule petitions.
I'll draft a letter for your signature if there's a sense the committee would like to do that.
Okay. Mike? Mike?
Yep, I was muted, sorry. I think it's a good idea to do that, but I also think we should encourage the select board to write on behalf of the town.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
so I could move to authorize the chair to send a letter on our behalf do we send it to Senator Barrett or the chair of the committee?
Both.
I think we send it to the chair of the committee at this point with a copy to Barrett and a copy to Rep. Cavea.
Okay.
That's in support of the home rule petitions.
Support of the home rule petitions. Right.
Very good. Motion by Mike,
Second,
second by Rich. Further discussion on this letter that we're doing this will be our letter to the committee. In this motion, are we also urging the select board to do that, or?
I'd like to amend my motion to include a recommendation to the select board that they too write on behalf of these home rule petitions to the chair of the committee.
Okay, I recommend that they likewise. Okay. And so that the motion as amended, okay, with the second as amended, Rich?
Yes.
All right. Is there further discussion? Okay, let's take a vote on that motion. Roll call. Linda?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Rich?
aye.
And Keith, aye. Very good. Thank you. Any other votes that we need to take on that, or discussion under funding sources?
By the way, I think this is a good idea because I think it's not impossible, as the sausage making goes further on Beacon Hill, that there's a compromise that says, well, those towns that have already said they want it can have it. So, you give something to the real estate industry and you give something to those towns that have been most vocal about wanting it, which are 9 or 10 at the moment. I mean, I'm not saying that I have any inside information, but I could sort of see that compromise happening, when the real estate lobby starts unloading.
Very good. Thanks all. We come to the next item on the agenda, which is public comment. And there's Carlin Reed. Hello.
Hi, Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. This is a question that goes back to the Assabet River Bluff MOU. Am I correct in understanding that under the document that was adopted today, the vote, the Concord Land Conservation Trust will now be a signer to the purchase and sale agreement, which means they will be a part owner of the 2 parcels? And if that is correct, then doesn't that tie the hands of the CHDC in the town to manage, control, dispose, operate the 2 lands? It is a substantive change if that was the impact of today's vote. So I'm seeking clarification of, is that what happened today? Thanks.
Yeah, the open space interests have always been a major funder of this plan. It has still not been determined who's going to own the property at the end of the day. Might be the town. And this is parcel B, who's going to own it at the end of the day. As it's been explained to me that there is a special status that the grant funding agencies give to nonprofits who are allowed to pre-acquire properties, which are then transferred to appropriate entities after a grant is awarded. So for example, with the open space, one scenario is that, and going into it, the scenario was all along, the CHDC would be the pre-acquirer of the property of the both parcels A and B. And then they'd hang on to parcel A for housing, but parcel B would go to somebody else. Hasn't been determined who. Could be the town, could be one of the open space entities. And so what has been addressed now is that where the open space entities are being asked to put $90,000 in cash on the table right now towards the $140,000 deposit. What comfort level do they need to have about their role as this project thing goes forward? Our group is putting $50,000 on the table for the deposit. That gives the ability to gives the time to go to town meeting for the funding that's necessary for the Community Preservation Committee and for the CIP funding. And if that funding doesn't get approved, or if we ultimately don't close, then the property's never acquired. And the only thing the only money that will have been put down is the deposit, which we are told and assured that the P&S will say is refundable if the whole deal isn't put together. The role, my understanding, the role of the conservation entities wish to play a similar role to what CHDC is playing, and maybe even more appropriately so, since it's an open space parcel. With respect to parcel B, that they want to be a party to the disposition of parcel B. CHDC, who was originally going to do it all by themselves, doesn't have a problem with that. If it makes them feel, or I would say is, if it makes the open space folks feel more comfortable about putting significant money down for the final purchase, that there's, I don't know how much it's been publicly announced what fundraising they've been able to do, but there's been some significant money that's been pledged already by the open space folks, significantly towards what their goal is. The CIP money, I think, would that Carrie has talked about seems like it would give us the total amount. When we look at what the pledge is, plus the housing monies and the open space monies, it looks like the money, the total that we need to acquire the property would be there. What we're trying to do, though, and this is the tough part, is making sure that we're satisfying all the requirements that state funding agencies will impose on us if we're successful in a grant. For example, does the town need to be the owner of the open space property at the end of the day? It's unclear, but maybe so. If so, then we would need a nonprofit to pre-acquire the property, hold on to it, and then transfer it to the town. I wish that we had all of those details worked out by today. We want to have, as Lee Smith was saying earlier, we are motivated to have those all figured out as soon as possible. But that's where we are now. I don't think that it's a different deal in any fashion than what we thought it was going in. But there's still some steps to be worked out, and I think it's worth taking the time to make sure we structure the deal in a way that allows us to get state funding. And just so I had suggested the simple approach. I hate it. Well, no, I don't mind bringing up what I did in prior jobs, but that we never closed on a purchase until after we signed the state grant. We agreement, which won't be any sooner than December this year, and it might be later if it's one grant program or another. But so how do you do that? You go to town meeting, you get a borrowing authorization to acquire the property to be reduced by the amount of a grant. And then you don't close until actually you've got the grant. That requires the seller to agree to a closing date that's later than July, which we don't appear to have in this case. We have it's my understanding that the agreement with the seller is a July closing. And so we're trying to do the best we can to have to essentially have the sale would be the pre-sale, right? The pre-acquisition by the nonprofits. That's what this closing that would occur in July. With if there's a later closing that's necessary and involves the town at some later date or the ultimate entities, then that happens later. But it's all very I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the steps are this week. Many of the answers we're getting closer to, and some of them we still need to have some more time. But I'm confident that the process that's there and the good faith of the parties, that everyone's busy putting money forward. And so that's a good sign. And we're just trying to maximize the funds that are there.
So it sounds like the answer to the question is, well, maybe. We'll have to see. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Thanks, Colin. Linda Miller, hello.
Hello, hello. Thank you to everyone for doing all this good work and following up. I just had one comment on the guidelines process as you're working through it, and it seems like you focused a lot on the quantitative aspects of what you can do, and that's so important for affordable housing. But I think it might be also worth considering putting in qualitative aspects, because I know just from being on the planning committee that that's really where we get all of our questions. But I think that once you've produced all this affordable housing, people will want to see that it's sustainable, that it's resilient to climate change, that there's some density, just are there elements that could be reflected in your guidelines that will give people in the town a sense of your interest in what their other interests might be as going beyond affordability.
That's a good point, Linda.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Linda.
And I also just wanted to make sure you knew in terms of the MBTA communities, I guess on Tuesday, the draft information came out from the state, and it looks like a very large ask. They're asking communities pretty much to have at will 750 units minimum over 50 acres with densities of 15 or more units per acre. And so clearly the state is continuing to ramp up the ask for affordable housing. And so that's just to let you know you're going to continue to be in the hot seat. So thank you for doing all the hard work.
Thanks, Linda. And on that point, I was on I participated in I was on the webinar yesterday where the DHCD and other state agencies were talking about the guidelines. They're guidelines that are out for a review and comment. The Metropolitan Area Planning Council has already submitted voluminous comments on the draft regs, in part looking less for the a cookie cutter, if not sledgehammer approach, and more towards individualized community by community targets that have thoughtfully arrived at what the goal should be, and that forward you. I'll forward you the MAPC's comments, and I'll forward it to
Oh,
the
great.
group
Great.
and to others. But it was some great input, and there will, and it will be something that a lot of I think that we shouldn't just assume that what's been issued is what it's going to be, and that we have the opportunity to make some real input, meaningful input in the process. And MAPC is going to be an important part of leading that charge for us.
Great.
So, great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have reached next item, which is schedule next meeting. I don't know if folks have any suggestion. Maybe, I think we ought to pick a date just so that we have something. We seem to like, well, we've met Thursdays at 1:30 for and I don't know if we might want to think about meeting I don't know if we need to meet, let's say, 2 weeks from today, if that would be all right. I think we need to not lose we need another meeting to talk more about the guidelines. Would be an opportunity to just check in on where things are in general. So so does Thursday, January 27th at 1:30 work for everybody?
Works for me.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could have comments by this weekend, I'll try and have a revision out by the end of next week. Everybody can look at.
Great, thanks very much. So we've reached that point where we can move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second,
Motion by Linda, seconded by Rich to adjourn. And let's take a roll call on that vote. Linda,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
Rich,
aye.
Keith, aye, so that we are adjourned at 3:25 PM and just accomplished, had a very good meeting today. So thanks everyone. for
Thank
being-
you.